Warning! This video will cause lots of disagreements about what is and is not Grimdark. Hey, what's up, bookworms? Mike back today to talk that favorite little subgenre of fantasy, Grimdark. Now, what is Grimdark is always going to be a conversation that comes up a lot, and a lot of disagreements are going to abound. A lot of people think it just means write piece of shit characters. I don't think that's what the genre is at all. In fact, a lot of people tell me that some of these series are Grimdark. I'm like, no, that's just straight nihilism. So I am guilty of it as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of talk about 5 series that I think are the best Grimdark series that I have read. And I'm going to talk about 5 that I want to read, which can be based off of feedback or just my own current interest in some of the Grimdark series I haven't read yet that I think are going to click for me. So what is Grimdark, you might ask? So it is actually defined as a subgenre in which characters and plot lines are morally gray and completely immoral, and the line between hero and villains is blurred. Works of Grimdark often take place in a dystopian or alternate world with some sort of dark twist. And needless to say, Grimdark stories tend to involve plentiful amounts of violence. So yeah, it's not going to be a genre that is for everybody, but for people like me, feed me more. I love it. I can't get enough of this because to me, once I found this, it was like, wow, I don't think I ever want just playing good versus evil, completely good versus completely evil for evil's sake. I don't really want that ever again. Now, I still have room in my life for things like that, but when I did discover this little subgenre, it was like coming home. It was everything I'd been wanting as an adult reading fantasy. The defining feature of Grimdark for me has been when you can write some characters that have very few redeeming qualities, yet as a reader, you find yourself rooting for them. That's what I'm kind of looking for. For me, the key is the characters, not just a cruel and hopeless world, but characters that are always kind of out for themselves, and you might look at them and be like, wow, that was a really bad decision. I hope they succeed. I find myself doing that. Well, you know, that's usually, for me, it is actually working. I think, again, just making your characters complete psychopaths or writing nihilism, that isn't it. That isn't it. That is just nihilism. That is not what I'm here for. So if some of those that you are looking for aren't here, maybe that's why. Maybe I viewed them that way. But again, this is a conversation. It's never me saying this is right and this is not. So these are the ones that I would recommend. I'm going to start off with the biggest one here, guys, because this is kind of what introduced me to it. And obviously, a lot of people have, everybody's heard of the series at this point, but I'm just saying that I've noticed lately that a lot of people are saying that Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, is not Grimdark. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You want to talk about morally gray characters? You want to talk about a hopeless world? You want to talk about anything can happen? I don't think that there's any series out here that really set Grimdark up for success more than A Song of Ice and Fire. I feel like there are so many series now that are popular of it because the TV show Game of Thrones really awakened people's eyes to what this little subgenre was. So I don't know how anybody can say that this is not Grimdark. I think it is the very basis of Grimdark. I think this is the one that kind of brought it popular to the masses. Now, like guys, like people like me that read fantasy like crazy, we're really plugged into the fantasy community. Obviously, we knew of these things before that, but I feel like now there are a lot of people discovering that little subgenre that they didn't know about before. Because when Game of Thrones first broke out on TV, and I was trying like crazy to get everyone to watch the show, like I don't really like fantasy. I don't want to watch your stupid fairy shit. That's kind of what I got, and I said, STFU, try the show. I guarantee you're gonna like it. And what do you know? Yeah, even casuals could get into it. So I will always credit Game of Thrones, the book, A Game of Thrones, for being the book that opened my eyes to, wow, there's a different kind of fantasy world out there of the things that when I go back now and I reread Lord of the Rings for the 4th or 5th time, at that point in my life, I was like, I do wish that there was some, maybe some darker elements. Maybe my characters did some things that weren't just always the right thing to do. I felt like I got that. So I always consider A Song of Ice and Fire like the very epitome of what Grimdark is, and it's the one that really opened my eyes to it. A series I read I think about a year and a half ago now, and I've recommended quite a bit on this channel, is The Last War series by Mike Shackle. I think that this is the one has kind of scratched that itch of something I'd been looking for, close to like a Joe Abercrombie. I felt like he finally found that method of writing those characters, again, completely despicable humans that you found yourself really rooting for. And again, with this world, it's just like everything is like, okay, well, you got bad guys and you got badder guys, but never in a way where you don't feel like you're rooting for something. And I think that is what made this series a really, really fun ride ride for me, and it's one that adds an interesting little plot device into it. I won't spoil what that is in book 2 that can mess some things up if it's not done right, and I think it's done wonderfully well. So with this, yeah, I will always recommend this series to people. If you are a fan of Mark Lawrence, Joe Abercrombie, you're really going to really dig this, because the way his dialogue is written is really, really great. And again, just how you will watch these characters transform over the course of the series, some from bad to badder, and some from complete pieces of human garbage to maybe passable, but still looking out for number 1. But again, when I say that, I want people to understand, you still will root for these characters. That is what the grimdark genre is all about for me, is if you can write those characters just that awful and you still want to see them succeed. I read this one rather recently, but it was one I always got told, I think that this had stuck to another book. It's one that I think that's going to really, really work well for you. And I got to give a hat tip to my guy Patrick. He's the one who really recommended this one to me for a while. Who basically in a way where he was like, quit reading all that other stuff, and I think that this is going to be one, but based off of your love for the First Law, that you're going to like. And that was A War for the Rose Throne by Peter McLean. I read this whole thing earlier this year, and I loved it. I loved it. It's one of those that was very much on a ground level kind of basis. So it feels a little different from all these epic fantasy ones, because it almost feels like it could take place in like the 1850s or something in London, and it's its own world and its own made-up areas. But it very much, a lot of people have talked about Peaky Blinders. I've still only watched the pilot episode of Peaky Blinders, but I can see the comparisons there. But from what I understand, after book 1, it's not really like that. But with this, I love the idea of getting inside this character's head who does not want power, but then once they get power, do they want to let it go? It's really asking a lot of those moral questions. And it just shows that I think that everyone is corruptible. You can go into something with the best of intentions, and absolute power corrupts absolute. Does it? Well, you'll see, because the character Thomas Piety goes on one hell of a journey in this story, and it shows that, no matter how deep a friendship goes, sometimes some sacrifices are going to have to be made. But this is crazy, crazy good character study of a character that is really damaged. What I love about this is he writes these damaged characters that are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome after this big war, and how that kind of, when they try to go back to normal life, how does that affect them in this cruel, cruel world. So I absolutely consider this grimdark because, again, no one is really anyone you call a stand-up person. There are lines for certain points of these characters, but after a while, you'll say, even those lines, well, they're kind of a dot in history at this point. So the highest of recommends for that one. I've got to talk about the elephant in the room. Everybody knows that one of my favorite fantasy series of all time is The First Law by Joe Abercrombie. This, to me, is the gold standard of what grimdark fantasy is. Now, why I would say that when I think that Song of Ice and Fire is my favorite fantasy series, because I feel like it still has one foot very, very firmly placed in epic fantasy, whereas this is just grimdark all the way around, because it is not dealing with a lot of magic. It's not dealing with dragons. It's not doing a lot of stuff with prophecy. It's just this bad man's trying to do better, but finds himself falling into bad ways. It's got this really bad man just being really, really bad, and whatever the means to an end is. And again, he writes one of the best characters in fantasy while doing that. And then another person, obviously, that is a complete piece of garbage that might find some redeeming qualities, but this world keeps banging them down to where they were before, and there is no way to kind of be good in this world. So for me, The First Law will always get the praise for the character work, because you can flip to any page in this book after you know the series very well, and you can just read a line of dialogue and you know what character it is. That's how well he defines his characters in The First Law. But with this, the dialogue is next level. The character work is incredible. And I think about some of the side characters that went on to have bigger moments later on in the standalones and maybe the sequel series, that is just incredible to watch their growth over the course of the story. And it's a series that I will go back to time and time again. This original trilogy is like, if there was a Star Wars trilogy of books for me, this is it. This is one that I go back to as my my blueprint for everything in how I think that modern grimdark fantasy should be written, because Joe is the gold standard in that regard. So when you're talking about like my favorite fantasy series of all time, A Song of Ice and Fire is my favorite. If you're talking about my favorite grimdark series of all time, it's without a doubt The First Law. The First Law is just so incredible, and putting it down there in the muck, asking the reader to come with them, and just getting comfortable with living there, and finding yourself being like, I just don't think any of these characters are redeemable. I will never root for any of these characters. And by book 2, you're like, oh no, don't take this character away from me, Joe. He's just that good of a writer, and his character work cannot be touched. And his dialogue, it's weird because this world is so cruel and punishing, and you find yourself laughing because the dialogue is just so good. So I think every Grimdark author out there that's looking to get going should read First Law and try their best to do anything as impressive. One that I actually think that people won't be expecting on this list, because I reviewed it like 3 years ago when I read it. Now, if there was a Siege version of Grimdark fantasy, I can't think of one better than the Godblind trilogy by Anna Stevens. With this, it's like most of this series is about a siege on a castle and trying to kind of make your way through it. Everything, the people on the outside of the walls and the people on the inside of the walls have very interesting and compelling stories to tell, but it is the darkest, most grim world that maybe ever. It's just so many things where in this, I think in my review I said, imagine an author that just keeps punching you in the balls over and over again, and you keep saying, thank you, sir, may I have another? That's this series, because it will gut punch you again and again and again, and you never want to stop. You want to keep finding out what's going to happen here at the end. So this one very much to me feels like it was inspired by Joe Abercrombie, because the characters probably, their dialogue reminds me the most of characters in the first. Like, this could take place in the world of the First Law, and I wouldn't be surprised. But yeah, very underrated. I feel like not a lot of people talk about this one, but I don't see any way you could read the First Law and then read this and not appreciate it. So yeah, I'm going to read some more Anna Stevens here in the future, just based off how much I did like this trilogy. But yeah, if you read book 1 and you're not instantly hooked, I don't really know if this is the genre for you, because there are a few who did it better than Anna did it in this series, and I'm quite happy that I read it. So that's probably the 5 that I would recommend to anyone who's looking to get into Grimdark, and I think those are going to be ones you're going to be pleased with for sure. If you are interested in the genre, I don't see any way you won't adore these 5 series. But if you're saying, hey, what about this, and this? Well, maybe I haven't read them yet. So what I'm going to mention now is 5 series that have been recommended to me a ton, or just ones I've been interested in on my own, and also gotten those recommendations for it. Now, I haven't read these, but I feel like they are going to fit the bill. The first one, and I've read about 4 chapters at this point, guys, is The Darkness That Comes Before. The Second Apocalypse, or Prince of Nothing. So it's like 3 books are Prince of Nothing, and 7, the next 4 books are Aspect Emperor, but the world overall, 7 books, is called The Second Apocalypse. Are you confused? You shouldn't be. This one, I've been told, is very much like _𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬, except it really, really leans heavy into saying, I am Grimdark, because _𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬 fans will argue with you for hours, hey Philip, about why _𝕬𝕬𝕬𝕬 is not Grimdark, because compassion is a major overlying theme. From what I've heard about this, no, he doesn't even pretend. He says this is Grimdark. In fact, it might be the darkest Grimdark out there. And from what I've read so far, I can see that in the first 10 pages, I'm like, well, this is different. This is different for sure. But yeah, I'm excited to finally get into the series, because I feel like people have been begging me to read this since I first started the channel back in 2019. And I'm glad that it's finally happening. And it's a heavy read, guys, but I'm liking where it's going so far, and I'm very excited to see if it stays this dark the whole time, if it stays this dark without slipping into nihilism. That's the key for me. So I want to make sure, hopefully, that I do find myself rooting for some of these characters. And I don't feel like people would have recommended. I mean, you can go to any of my, talking about my video about talking about the Last War, talking about the First Law, you're always going to see somebody saying, you've got to read Baker, man. I think you're going to love it. And we're going to find out here very soon. Another one I get recommended a ton is The Manifest Illusions by Michael R. Fletcher. This is one that, I remember Mark Lawrence put together this thing where he had like a grading system on how things were rated as Grimdark. And using his grading system, this book right here, Beyond Redemption, was apparently the most Grimdark book out there. And it's been on my radar since I read that. And that was back in like 2020. Because I remember at the time I had Googled books like The First Law, and I found that blog post by Mark Lawrence, and this was the book at the top. And that's what first put it on my radar. But once I started this channel, a lot of people were like, yeah, you got to check that out. It is happening this year. It is happening this year. Won't tell you when, but it is on my internal schedule that I have not released yet. So I am kind of playing it fast and loose with my schedule this year, but I do have some special plans, and this one is on it, and you guys will know about that when it does get a little closer. So I don't really know a ton about that series at all, because some people recommend it, something I think like your dreams manifest into reality, or your nightmares manifest into reality. So it sounds like it's actually a little bit of grimdark horror fantasy, which just sounds awesome. Sounds like something I could really be in. I made a video a while back about some lesser known fantasy series that I think I'd like to get into. Now, I don't know that necessarily, because I feel like one person will say it's kind of sci fantasy, and then the next person will say it is grimdark fantasy. But that series is the Coldfire trilogy by C.S. Friedman. With this one, that's the only one I don't have a physical copy of, so I've got the digital here. I hope you can see that. But the Coldfire trilogy is one that my buddy Jordan over at iWizard just carries on about. He's actually had Celia on his channel to talk to and just says how great it is. So maybe he can actually give me a little idea if it is considered grimdark or not. But for a lot of people said, yes, it is one of the earliest grimdark series that they read. And to me, okay, it sounds like it's got a lot of brutality in it and a very, very punishing world. And again, I feel like that's the ingredient. So with me, if the character works great, sure, I think I would be into it for sure. But that's when I again, just listen to Jordan just gush about that series, and he was so excited when I said I was going to read it, and I haven't gotten to it yet. But that much many things get pushed down on this list, so I don't have that one in the plans yet, but it is still definitely on my radar as one I'm going to read eventually. One that I keep having on my list every year of series I will start this year, and God willing it still happens this year, is The Lotlands by Jonathan French. And I can never just kind of think of going back to this note that I got. The patron who actually sent me this book and said, Mike, I think you'll love this book. They say fuck 237 times. So with me, it's like, yeah, hey, I might be a little juvenile in that regard. I definitely think that you can't really have a grimdark book without some bad language in it. It isn't necessary, but it does help. I mean, I'm married to a redhead, guys. I hear a lot of bad language. It happens sometimes. But with this, I like the idea of it not being human main characters. These are kind of like, I guess, they're mostly orcs, or maybe there's orc hybrids or something. So that's cool. The idea of some characters that aren't human, that sounds really fun. But apparently this is very much inspired by Sons of Anarchy, so that sounds really like a neat idea. But it does fall under the grimdark umbrella from what I understand. But again, I don't have very many feedback on this because these are based off of recommendations. And this one really first got on my radar when I saw her Twitter handle was Queen of Grimdark. Now, apparently, obviously, if you know, Joe Abercrombie goes by Lord Grimdark on Twitter. And I don't know if it was playing off of that or whatever, but I read an interview by Anna Smith Spark a while back, and she was saying the primary influence for Empires of Dust was how much she loved Scott Baker, which is, the Second Apocalypse, which I already talked about. So with this, I've heard conflicting things. Some people say it starts great, and then it kind of evolves into things they don't really like. I don't know. So that's what I'm talking about. Is it grimdark, or does it slip into nihilism? Because I feel like it is a problem with some people to say, okay, I've got to keep making it darker. I've got to keep making it darker. And guys, elephant in the room is why I didn't like Broken Empire by Mark Lawrence. I know a lot of people are going to bring that up. Why don't you have Broken Empire in here? I thought that Jorg was a complete psychopath, and I wasn't interested in that character. I didn't want to see them succeed. So I'd be interested to see if that same criticism falls on this one. But Anna has been really, really kind to me. I mean, I've been saying I was going to read this for like 3 years, and she's always been very, very nice about it and saying, if I want to talk, tell me when I started. She was going to send me some book plates and stuff. Again, whenever an author will mingle with us commoners, it makes me more interested to read their books. But that's one that's kind of, I think I did my, female fantasy authors I want to read soon. I did that list a while back, and that one's just kind of kept on falling down the list here. But again, that one, like I said, the only thing that's kind of stopped me on it is kind of the mixed feedback, the divisive feedback that I've read on it, is where one person will say it's an amazing grimdark series, and a lot of people will say it starts as grimdark and then just goes to just like cruel and unnecessary. So part of me is like, that sounds good, but the other part of me is like, well, again, if I'm not rooting for your characters, grimdark really doesn't work for me. But I'm excited to find out. So first, I know that some people might not consider some of these grimdark. They consider it something else. That's always going to be a fine line of an argument to have, and I understand it. And again, like I said, I engage in it as well. So if you don't consider some of these that I recommended grimdark, that's cool. You're allowed to have that opinion. The 5 that I recommend to you, I think if you are interested in the grimdark subgenre, I think they're all going to work for you. If you liked one of those 5 I mentioned, I think you'll like the other 4. So again, check some of these out, guys, because I think this is, to me, it's like when you get past a certain age and you have maybe kind of that jaded look of like, okay, well, yeah, that goody little two-shoes would have never done that in a real-life situation. I think this might be the genre for you, because you will find some things where it's like, okay, that is a little morally ambiguous, and I'd be curious to see what would happen if they have taken this path. I think that's what this subgenre is all about, to see the road less traveled in traditional fantasy, and that's why I will always love it. So guys, I'd love to hear some of your recommendations. If you've got some that I didn't list here that you want to talk about, please. I'm always looking for more suggestions for Grimdark Fantasy because I do love it. It's just hard for me to find ones that I actually agree that might be Grimdark Fantasy. So drop in the comments, guys, and let me know, and I will talk to you there.